Hello. Party people in the house, listen up. Okay, that's my check.
All right. Good evening, and welcome to the June 9th meeting of the Kalamazoo Zoning Board of Appeals, a voluntary advisory board appointed by the City Commission. Could we have a roll call attendance?
Vanden Hamburg,
Present.
Turpinning,
Here.
Lauder. Here. Carroll,
Present.
Doan. Here. Harrington.
Present.
Thank you. Public comments will be accepted during the times as indicated on tonight's meeting agenda. Community members that wish to provide public comments over the phone can call 888-382-9556 during the public comment period. They will enter a queue and will be prompted to offer their comments in turn. Callers will be commenting to the board live and will no longer be able to leave a recorded message. Are there any announcements or changes to the original agenda?
We have no changes to the agenda for this evening.
I appreciate it. We will move on to acceptance of last month's minutes. Are there any changes proposed to the minutes? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving last month's minute signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, the same. The motion has passed to accept last month's minutes. I will now explain our procedure for tonight's public hearing. For each request, the secretary will read the application into the public record. The applicant or representative will then have 10 minutes to provide their comments. Following that, the public is invited to step up to the podium, starting with those in favor of the application, clearly stating their name and address and presenting their comments within the 3-minute time limit. Following all comments from those who wish to speak in favor of the request, we will invite those who wish to speak in opposition or otherwise comment on the same. Next, any comments will be aired for the board and audience. After this, we will close the public hearing on the request. Once the public hearing is closed, the board will then conduct what is called a finding of fact, where the board states what they feel are the facts of the request. The board must approve the finding of fact. Therefore, the first vote you will hear is not a ruling on the request, but of the finding of fact. Then the board discusses the request in order to determine a ruling. The board reserves the privilege to ask questions of persons who have already spoken, even though the public comment portion has closed. Once discussion is ended, the board will move on to a roll call vote. A full board consists of 6 members, with 4 votes required to grant a non-use variance or a use variance. Will the board secretary now read the first application into the record?
An application for a variance for provisions of the zoning ordinance has been filed with the Zoning Board of Appeals by Mount Zion Baptist Church and Hollander Development Company for 724 and 730 North Burdick, 108 and 128 East Frank, 729 North Edwards, 121, 125, 129, 131, 135 East North Street, 709, 713 North Edwards, which are situated in Live Work 1 district, and Residential Multi-Dwelling District RM36. The applicants are requesting a dimensional variance from Chapter 50-7.2 to authorize an additional 17 off-street parking spaces, which will allow a total of 56 off-street parking spaces for a 70-unit senior living facility, where 39 off-street parking spaces is the maximum allowed. Please note this request will not change the zoning classification of the properties. This is a request only for variance regarding the item described above.
Thank you. Will the applicant step up to the podium, sign in, provide your name into the microphone, and explain the request in the 10 minutes provided? Just a moment.
We don't think you're transmitting.
Try it again.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Jason Muniz. I'm Vice President of Hollander Development and lead developer on this project. I want to thank all of you for your time. I'm joined today by Mr. Mike Flynn from Bison Associates, who is our lead architect for this development. We are proposing to develop a 70-unit multifamily development across 2 buildings on the subject parcels, affordable to seniors aged 55 and over, earning between 20% and 60% of the area median income. And a key portion of our financing, up to approximately 70% of our equity, would be provided through the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, who has guidelines in place for parking minimums that are in excess of what we're requesting here. So we are attempting to kind of meet in the middle. And I brought Mr. Flynn along to address some of the finer points of the development, but that is essentially the crux of our issue, is that we have a statewide ordinance or guidance on design minimums and the city ordinance or zoning on maximums that are in conflict. Happy to take any questions.
Or is your other guest going to speak? You still have 8.5 minutes, so.
Okay, I'll keep this very brief. Again, my name is Michael Flynn. I'm with Bice Architects and Engineers, here representing Hollander Development and Mount Zion in the capacity as Architecture and Planning Group. And I guess the crux of the request for variance from the zoning ordinance is basically a dimensional variance in the parking requirements, the city requiring a maximum 0.5 parking spaces per dwelling unit. MISTA, on the other hand, requires 1 parking space per unit, and we're requesting a sort of a meeting in the middle of that based on market research that Jason can stipulate in other facilities for senior independent living of a ratio of 0.8 parking spaces per unit. We feel that that's consistent with the intent of the zoning regulations, and as you know, going through the criteria as far as granting variances, as far as I can stipulate further and go through some of those if you'd like. I think in general, it meets the requirements of adaptation to the characteristics of the land. If you're looking at the site plan, we're on 4 streets. We have 2 faces, basically 2 buildings. The north building is on a corner of Burdick and Frank, and then the southern building fronts along North. We've sequestered the parking internal into that block, being sensitive to some of the urban planning aspects of that. And so we feel like the characteristic of the site with the internal parking will allow us to hide or shield the slight increase in parking that we're asking as part of the variance. Further, the site configuration or the requirements from the conflicting requirements from the city and from MISTA that we're trying to find that good middle ground on, or not a self-created situation or any fault of the development team. And a literal interpretation of the zoning regulations might put some undue restrictions on that. We feel that, some latitude in that is consistent with the intent of the zoning ordinance and the intent of the master plan and the intent of providing and allowing mixed, low-income, mixed-use development and redevelopment in the near north side. We don't feel that the granting of the request in the parking would create any adverse action upon any neighbor or other development in the area. In fact, we feel that it would actually enhance that. I think that hits most of the points as far as making, meeting the criteria for some of the variances. Jason, I don't know if I missed anything from your perspective, or
I
if
don't
you
think
want to
you
reiterate.
missed anything. I think I did. I would also address the marketing perspective of it that Mr. Flynn had brought up before, which is to say that across our portfolio, we have approximately 1,100 units of affordable senior housing, and we only have one site across any of that, which is a 106-unit development in Muskegon that I think would be comparable to this, that is also at approximately 0.8 spaces per unit, and that is a site that we've been operating for approximately 20 years, and the parking has always been a little bit of a contention. It has been tight, it's been enough, but we do have concerns that anything below that would cause undue burden on our residents. And I guess I would also just point out that, these are low-income residents, and, kind of our spirit or our mission is to always treat them the same as we would anybody at a market rate. And so we don't want any part of this development to be less than for these residents. This will be a $23 million total development cost of the project, and we just want to make sure that it's fair and equitable to everybody, including our neighbors as well as our residents.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there questions from the board of the applicants?
I have a question. When you say 0.8 versus 0.5, what do you mean by that? What's wrong with his thing?
It's in economic, it turns off.
It reset. Oh, there we go. That is parking spaces per unit. So the zoning allows for a maximum of half of a space per apartment that we are planning to build. And so 0.5 would be 35 out of 70 units. The zoning
I
actually allows
see.
for 0.5.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions from the board?
What's MISTA's requirement?
MISHA's requirement for senior housing is one space per unit.
And then in 0.8 is what you're going for today?
Correct. And
They'll accept 0.8?
we have high confidence that they will. And we've had preliminary conversations that they will. Thank you.
Is there precedent set that they have made those types of accommodations previously?
Yes, in fact, they've made those for us.
Oh, you said that. I'm sorry.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Now those in favor are invited to speak at the podium. Seeing none, now those opposed are invited to speak at the podium. Seeing none, are there any phone comments?
No phone comments at this time.
I thank you. Are there staff comments?
Staff would just like to make a few comments. The applicant covered it quite extensively, but yeah, I guess the crux has been laid out quite clear, that the MISTA standard and the City of Kalamazoo standard for senior housing don't align, and because this is a LIHTC project, a low-income housing tax credit project, it's being submitted to MISTA for funding, and we we would not like to see, see or risk having this project found to be ineligible because of lack of parking. So staff is supportive of the 0.8. It's a balance between the two. It's also been demonstrated by the applicant that this has worked on other projects for them, this 0.8 parking spaces per senior housing unit. So with that being said, it meets the review criteria in staff's opinion, and we are supportive of it.
Thank you. Does the board have any additional questions before the establishing of the finding of fact? Very well. Is there a motion for the finding of fact? No worries.
Say the whole thing?
Yes.
Okay. I move that the finding of fact for 724 and 730 North Burdick Street, 108 and 128 East Frank Street, 729 North Edward Street, 121, 125, 129, 131, 135. Am I speaking too fast?
Nope.
Okay. East North Street, 709 and 713 North Edward Street shall include all information included in the notice of public hearing dated May 25th, 2022. 60 notices of public hearing were sent and no responses were received. A public hearing was held before the board and public comments were accepted. In addition to the information and documents contained, in agenda packets staff provided for this request, the Zoning Board of Appeals received additional documents on the request, including all of these things in this packet that were submitted. There were several things. It was extraordinarily thorough. Should I say anything more about that? Okay. The finding of fact shall include those documents just described and also the facts and comments made during the public hearing, which are summarized as followed. Oh, goodness. Jason, Munoz from Hollander Development came before the board and stated that there were 70 units, that they were requesting a dimensional variance so that a 70-unit multifamily dwelling, affordable senior living facility could be, it's a dimensional variance for parking. Jason Munoz is the lead developer with Hollander Development. And he has outlined that MISHDA is funding a big part of this project, and their statewide guidance and design minimums outline that they are conflicting with our city ordinance, and that's why they're seeking this dimensional variance. The engineer for BICE Architecture, Michael Flynn, also came to supplement his perspective about the request, outlining that the request is consistent with the intent of the zoning ordinance, which will allow for the facility to be erected. And this is something that they have done many, many times over, having over 1,100 units of affordable housing. And there is a precedent set that they can have 0.8 spaces per unit. And MISHDA has set a precedent before where they've done it for them, and they're confident that that'll happen again. And that's it. That's the finding of fact.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, the same. The motion for the finding of fact has passed. Is there a motion regarding the pending application?
I make a motion for approval of a variance from provision of the zoning ordinance. Sorry, let me start again. I make a motion for a variance from provisions of the zoning ordinance that has been filed with the Zoning Board of Appeals by Mount Zion Baptist Church and Holland Development for 724, 730 North Burdick, 108 and 128 East Frank, 729 North Edwards, 121, 125, 129, 131, 135 East North, 709 and 713 North Edwards, which are situated in Live Work, one district and residential multi-dwelling district RM36. The dimensional variance is from Chapter 50-7.2 to authorize an additional 17 off-street parking spaces, which will allow a total of 56 off-street parking spaces for a 70-unit senior living facility where 39 off-street parking spaces is the maximum allowed.
Thank you. Is there a second for this motion?
Second.
Thank you. Now we shall discuss the application. Board members can express support or opposition based on all the variance criteria being met. Does anybody have any pro or con discussion?
So I'm going to be in favor of granting this variance today. I think that this is a great location for not only a senior housing facility, but also for senior housing that's for low or moderate income households. It seems to me that if there's a 70-unit facility, people that are 55 plus are likely to have vehicles or have visitors with vehicles. 0.5 vehicles per unit may be somewhat impractical. Not only that, I think the special circumstance here, the way that this affordable housing is being financed and the conflict between MSHDA regulation and the city ordinance, does present a special circumstance. In this case, in order to facilitate allowing that financing to happen, I'm going to definitely be in favor of this.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I have something to say. It looks beautiful. I'll be in favor of this as well. Is there any other discussion from any more of us, or are we just gonna, does anybody else have anything to say before?
No, you can say what you'd like.
Okay.
Please.
I'm curious about MSHDA's role in this. We've had these types of if they say no to this, then what will happen if we approve the dimensional variance?
The variance runs with the land.
Okay.
The variance doesn't change, correct me, staff, and they would lose their bid at MSHDA.
So would the development still be able to happen? If they don't get it, if we don't grant it, if MSHDA doesn't say yes to.
Well, they might get financing from a wealthy billionaire or a bank and not MSHDA, but that's not our concern.
Okay. As it relates to the 0.5 versus the 0.8, that's not a part of what we're supposed to be taking into consideration right now.
Well, the board is weighing whether this is a balance based on the practical difficulty of how this is being financed and the standards that they're working with, and also the comment that the chairman or that Mr. Lager made about the 55 and older. I mean, there are residents that are going to live there that are still going to drive. There's going to be workers on site occasionally. There's going to be visitors. So there's definitely there's a certain parking demand even in a senior housing facility. And but first and foremost, we want to make sure that that this project has the opportunity to get funded by MISTA. And that's why staff is looking at supporting it. Secondarily, the way the parking lot is set up, where it's interior to the lot, you won't even notice the additional 17 parking spaces because it's all towards the center of that block. So it's, they've mitigated the view of the parking in addition to, asking for just enough additional parking, to what they've seen work on other MISTA-funded projects in the past.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Remy?
No, thanks.
Very well. Anybody else? Very well. Mr. Eldridge, can I get a roll call vote on the motion?
We'll start with Van den Hamburg,
Yes.
Turpinning,
Yes.
Lager,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Doan,
Yes.
Harrington.
Yes.
The motion passes. And your application has been approved. I thought it was just me, and I didn't want to ask a personal favor, but it appears too loud for me, and now Beth has said the same. Christina has said the same thing. If it's just me, we'll move on, but if it's too loud, can we turn it down a little? Would the board say, I think we're in a, thank you, I think that's perfect for me. The board secretary will now read the next application into the record.
An application for a variance for provisions of the zoning ordinance has been filed with the Zoning Board of Appeals by Jacob Tardini of 331 Ingleside Terrace, which is situated in the residential single-dwelling district, RS5. The applicant is requesting the following. 1, a use variance from Chapter 4, 4.1 to authorize the reuse of a structure as a duplex in the residential single-dwelling district. 2, a dimensional variance from Chapter 5, 5.3, 5E to authorize a 0 setback for steps and an elevated walkway for the north side yard where a 3-foot setback is required. 3, a dimensional variance from Chapter 5, 5.3, 5D to authorize a 5-foot setback for a porch on the west side of the structure where a 15-foot rear yard setback is required. Please note that this request will not change the zoning classification of the properties. This is a request only for variances regarding the items described above.
Thank you very much. Will the applicant step to the podium, sign in, and provide your name into the microphone, and then explain your request in the 10 minutes provided?
Testing, testing. Ooh, that was a little loud, sorry. My name is Jake Tardani, and my primary residence is 2330 South Park Street, and I am here with a rezoning request for 331 Ingleside Terrace. Thank you all for being here tonight and for the volunteer position that you have. I don't think many people realize that it's a volunteer position, so you're taking time out of your evening to do this and hear these different cases. So I acknowledge that. I know what it's like to put extra time in, and I appreciate that very much. 331 Ingleside Terrace is one of the most unique houses that I've had the opportunity of renovating and purchasing over the last 10 years of being a landlord in the city of Kalamazoo. It is one of 28 houses in the city that I currently own, most of which are in operation as rental properties for residents from lower income, middle income, short-term rentals, and even we have refugee families from Afghanistan and the Congo in a couple of our rentals through Samaritas and Bethany Christian Services. Odyssey Properties is the name of my company that I started a couple of years ago, and this started off as a hobby that has since turned into something that is far greater than myself. So this property specifically is unique in that it sits on a very small parcel compared to the size of the property itself. Property is fairly large, almost 3,000 finished square feet, and it was originally one of the first churches for the West Main Hill area. We call it the church house when we refer to it as we're working on it and doing work too. My favorite room really revels this right here. You walk in and it's about 15-foot ceilings, 30-foot by 20-foot. It's just a giant, massive room with crown molding and ornate trim. It's just beautiful. So this property was originally ran as a duplex back in the 90s, and then after that time frame, it was owner occupied and lived in, and it was no longer registered as a rental property. As such, the rental certification lapsed, and my request here today is to be able to reopen that option up to run it as a duplex family dwelling as opposed to a single family dwelling. At the end of the day, it will still remain a rental property, so whether this request is honored or not, it'll be either a single family dwelling with about 5 bedrooms, 2 baths, or it'll be a duplex rental property with 2 bed, 1 bath per unit. It's currently already laid out as such, but we have to then get the approval for these variances so that we can, A, run it as a duplex, and the accompanying dimensional variants are to add passage from the outside of the structure to the northwest corner where there is access to it. Providing housing is something that I love to do. It is my full-time passion, my full-time career. I did a corporate career for about 10 years before I transitioned almost 3 years ago to real estate full-time. I only do residential. I only work within the city of Kalamazoo. I have no other properties outside of it. So I'm in and out of the economic development department often, the building department often with permits. All of the work that would be done here would be under the city of Kalamazoo building permit process as well too. And at the end of the day, it's a project that's well within the scope that we have experience to be able to do. Renovating these old houses, taking them from condemned, almost nearly condemned condition into fully functional, affordable rental properties below the market rent is what my business model is based on. So much so that 2 years ago, I applied with the Community Development and Economic Planning Department for a HOME grant, H-O-M-E, which is the way City of Kalamazoo disseminates HUD funding from the government federal level, and Odyssey Properties was the first for-profit company to ever receive approval for that grant money, that home funding as well. This last year we applied for a second round of funding and we were approved yet again, and we're using that funds to develop 4 specific properties along Denner Street in the West Douglas neighborhood to become long-term affordable rentals by HUD standards as well for the next 15 plus years. This specific neighborhood is near and dear to me because I went to college back at Western many, many years ago and lived on Denner Street as well. And as such, West Douglas is now I have 16 properties in the West Douglas neighborhood that I currently own and we're renovating and or are rented out as well too. Approval of this variance will let us to continue to provide additional units within the city as opposed to just a single family dwelling. And the management of a duplex unit is well within the experience that I have as a landlord too. So I significantly appreciate your guys' consideration and look forward to any questions you have.
Thank you. Are there questions from the board?
Yeah, could you describe the walkway and the porch to me, like what the function of both of those is and what's the need for being so close to the lot lines?
Can you hear? I think we got it now.
Yeah.
So there's currently a space of 6 feet between the subject property and the neighboring property to the north. Previously, there was a walkway that was about 36 inches wide, spanning from the subject property towards that one. But the parcel that the subject property sits on is only 1.5 feet from the actual structure. So our walkway requires a minimum of 36 inches by code for the building code, which Unit 2, which is at that northwest corner. So we really need a passage to go from Ingleside Terrace up and along the property to the rear entryway for that specific unit. As of right now, there's no other feasible way to create a hallway or a walkway through the main level to be able to get to the stairs accessing Unit 2 at the very rear of the property. It would almost make it unusable space on the main level itself.
And the intent is a concrete pad?
Thank you. We're going to actually go with crushed gravel and pavers. There are utility lines, gas utility lines underneath this walkway, and so we're well aware of that. We've had them marked and whatnot. In case there's ever a need to access those utility lines, we decided that large pavers with dolomite down would do the trick to accommodate that.
Right. And then the porch?
Yeah, good question on that. The porch is not so required as part of the functionality as a duplex. However, along the west side of this property, there were 2 exterior doors that led out onto a quite dilapidated porch overlooking the Mountain Home Cemetery, I believe is what it's called. And so the porch currently encroaches the property line up to about 1 foot, 2 foot from my property line, but it does rest on specifically the subject property's parcel. And the deck that we're looking for approval for, it was something that was rebuilt in the exact same size as the existing former one on these steel beam pillars that are about 6 feet from the property as well. So we had to do no digging, there was no intrusion of the natural slope features, nothing along those lines. But I do understand now in the process of going through this that there were certain setbacks we should have observed and looked at in the process of reconstructing that.
In large part, you're sort of restoring this property to things that it has already had in the past.
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
And interestingly, too, the neighbor who sold it to me lives in that property just to the north, so they've been very accommodating, as which we've seen with the easement as well, to be able to work on the restoration of this property and the walkway and whatnot, too. We all just want to make sure that it's legal and approved before we move forward with anything as such.
Thank you. Are there other board questions of the applicant? Thank you. Now, those in favor are invited to speak at the podium. You can have a seat. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, so we have 3 separate variances here, so.
Correct.
We can do one, public hearing for all 3 of them, but they do need to be discussed and voted on separately.
Surely. So let's backtrack a little bit. Are there anybody that wants to speak in favor of any of the variance requests? Seeing none, are there any that are opposed that would like to speak about any of the 3 variance requests? Please, please. This case has 3 variance requests. You're probably for the next property? Thank you. Sorry. Just to recap, I don't see anybody that wants to speak in favor or opposed to this application. Are there any phone comments?
No phone comments at this time.
Thank you. Staff, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll just work through the use variance first, and then we can circle back and talk about the dimensional variance. And what was done in the staff report is those were broken out separately. So that first section of the staff report under the staff findings covers the use variance, and then it goes into the 2 dimensional variances. But I guess the comments I want to impart with the board, as far as the interpretation of the ordinance and the application for this particular property, we did, the records check as mentioned, and it was used as a registered rental up until 1999. So it does, there is a history of it being used as a duplex. It's still, the interior layout is such that it's a duplex. And as the applicant mentioned, that's the desire to reuse it as a duplex. If this isn't granted tonight, they've got to do some altering of the floor plan to make it a 5-bedroom, single-family home. But that is, the main element that I wanted to mention. And then the fact that there is no exterior changes being proposed for the structure. The doors are where they were positioned when Mr. Tardani purchased the property, which is from the side. The main entrances are on actually the side of the house. And so that has, been a situation he's worked with the neighbor to straighten out as far as an easement, to rebuild the stairs and the elevated walkway or landing in front of those side doors. But, Mr. Tardani is essentially trying to use it, in its current form as a duplex. And there are other multi-units on that street. We did a check of the entire block, and there's other duplexes. There is actually a 5-unit at the corner of West Main and Ingleside. So it's a mix throughout. And you've got this property backing up to the cemetery to the west. On the opposite side, on the east side of Ingleside Terrace, it actually transitions to RD 19, which is a duplex zone district. So really half this street is residential duplex, and that'd be the east. The west half is in the RS5, residential single dwelling. So that's another unusual circumstance here. So those are my main comments related to the use variance. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Does the board have any additional questions before the establishing of the finding of fact?
Pete, did you have other comments about the setback variances? Or we're only talking about the use variance?
I think we should go through, do we want to go through and vote on this and then go back and have a discussion
Okay.
on,
So,
Yeah.
so you're indicating there would be 3 finding of facts? Or shall we establish the
That-
finding of fact, then vote separately?
that would be complicated, 3 finding of facts.
Yeah, that's what I didn't think you were
Okay,
saying that.
Okay, no, that was what I was implying, but you're right, it doesn't, it makes this more cumbersome than it is.
Do you feel comfortable? All right, then we'll proceed. Do you have a motion for the finding of fact? Oh, I thought you were taking it, I'm sorry. You feel comfortable with all 3? At once? I'm making it difficult. Go ahead.
Okay. Here's where my confusion comes in. I was thinking that we were going to talk a little bit more. Mr. Eldridge, you've discussed, to my understanding, the staff comments about the use variance. So there's 1 use variance and 2 dimensional variances.
Correct.
And you spoke, is my understanding correct, to the use?
I was speaking to the use variance when I was referring to the prior use of.
Right, right. That was my understanding. So if we vote now, it's going to be, I would share my finding of fact for the use, and then we would go back and then do the,
I do not want 3 finding of facts. I want
Okay.
1.
So yes, so the chair was asking if you were comfortable doing a finding of fact covering all 3 variances
Yeah.
at once.
Very well, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry to have come.
Yes, so if we circle back to the use variance,
Thank you, Beth.
we had the historical use of the structure, and specifically the fact the interior layout is that of a duplex right now. We had the zoning of that street, which is, one side is our RD 19 duplex, the other side is residential single dwelling. What I didn't mention was that the applicant has sufficient parking for the duplex as well. So if we look at the 2 dimensional variances, the first dimensional variance is related to the walkway on the north side of the house, and typically any sort of stairs or landing are required to have a 3-foot setback from the property line. And in this case, there's only 1.8 feet from the side of the house to the property line, yet there's entry doors that are at least 3.5 to 4 feet above grade, so there has to be an elevated deck or landing constructed and stairs leading down. That's what was there before that had to be torn out because it was decayed. So Mr. Tardani has worked with the neighbor to establish an easement so that he could use his entire property and have a little bit of overhang onto the neighboring property to build a sufficient deck and staircase. The practical difficulty here is, again, the layout. The stairs that go to the 2nd floor apartment are in the back of the house, accessed directly from that door on the north side of the house. So it's the floor plan that, that he's working with. And so he's trying to reuse that entry door in a safe manner. That was all for the first deck. So that's clear enough. That's the side, the north side deck, dimensional variance number 1. Now, dimensional variance number 2 is replacement of, again, an existing deck. This deck is on the west side of the house, and where a deck normally needs to be positioned 15 feet from the rear property line in this zone district, this will be 5 feet from the rear property line. The difficulty is the positioning of the house, which plays into, not leaving much room on the the west side. Again, and the fact this was the size of the deck that was removed, that was deteriorated. So it was only 8 feet in length extending out from the house, and Mr. Tardani is just replacing that same deck, extending out 8 feet. So it will be positioned 5 feet from the rear property line. In this case, it does not back up to any developed properties other than a cemetery, so there is no structures that are in close proximity. In fact, there's a tree line along that side of the cemetery, so if there wasn't survey stakes, you would think it was an extension of the backyard up to the tree line. So there is no adverse impact with the replacement of this rear deck as well. And last thing I wanted to mention is the footings and steel posts for that rear deck are being reused. So this isn't, completely rebuilding the former deck. There are elements of the original deck structure that are still intact and are being reused or repurposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion of finding of fact?
I move that the finding of fact for 331 Ingleside Terrace shall include all information included in the notice of public hearing dated May 25th of 2022 and the agenda packet staff provided for this request. 50 notices of public hearing were sent and 5 responses were received, and they are as follows. Raymond Patterson of 308 Prairie Avenue in support. Carrie Hill of 1315 Blakesley Street in support. Ethan Applet of 308 Prairie Avenue, Unit 2 in support. Isaac Stakasowicz, 216 Ingleside Terrace in support, and the Oakwood Neighborhood Association in opposition.
I'm sorry, could I interrupt? I think that those last 2 in support and opposition were for the third case tonight rather than this case.
I concur.
Okay.
So if you just said strike the last 2 that you mentioned, I think we'd be fine.
Okay. All right, please strike Isaac Stakowitz.
It would be Raymond Patterson.
Raymond Patterson.
And Oakwood Neighborhood Association.
And the Oakwood Neighborhood Association.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. The applicant is requesting 2 dimensional variances and 1 use variance. The use variance is to authorize the reuse of the structure as a duplex due to a lapse in the dwelling zoning status. The dimensional variance is to authorize a 0 setback for steps and an elevated walkway where a 3-foot setback is required. There's also a dimensional variance to authorize a 5-foot setback for a porch where a 15-foot rear yard setback is required. This home was a former church in the Douglas West Main Hill neighborhood. It was a duplex in the 1990s, and as mentioned earlier, the rental certification has lapsed. They're looking for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath per unit as a duplex. For the walkway, there's a current 6-foot with 1.5 feet for the walkway, and they need to have walkway to access the unit in the rear. They are looking to have the surface of this access be crushed gravel and concrete pavers. The porch on the west side encroaches on a property line, and they are looking to rebuild a deck that was previously there. Neighbors along the property line are supportive. And I conclude.
Thank you. Before I ask if there's a second, I appreciate, Beth, that you included the support and oppose. That's something new we are trying to include. Thank you. Is there a second for the finding of fact motion?
Second.
Thank you very much. The finding of fact has been accepted. Oh, no, it hasn't. There's been a second, and I can't unilaterally accept it. Those in favor of accepting the finding of fact, please signify by saying aye.
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 And those opposed, the same. The motion for the finding of fact has passed. Is there a motion regarding the pending application first variance request only?
Which is the use, correct?
The use, correct.
I make a motion for a use variance from Chapter 4, 4.1 to authorize the reuse of the structure at 331 Ingleside Terrace as a duplex in the residential single dwelling district.
Thank you. Will there be a second?
Second.
Thank you. Now we shall have discussion. The board members can express support or opposition. I'll go first. I'll be in support of this variance request, the use variance. It appears as though it's plenty of precedence for this being used as a duplex in the past. Any other comments on this use variance request or discussion?
No, I'm going to be in favor of this variance request on this property for the same reason I'm going to be in favor of all 3 of them. This is really, from the way I'm understanding this, restoring what's a very unique building used residentially on a unique lot, small lot with a large building on it, on a unique street that has very small lots, a very narrow street, and backs up to the cemetery. From my recollection, a variety of houses on this street have features that are the way they are because of the shapes of the lot and the size of the houses on the lot. And to restore this to productive use, creating more units, seems like a good policy. And the fact that, duplexes aren't allowed on one side of the street and are allowed on the other may also be construed as an impractical zoning ordinance as well, or at least a zoning boundary line.
Thank you. Any other discussion or comments on the use variance?
Is there anything to be said? I don't see anything on this usability rendering about that, like, shows that people that have wheelchairs can get up here. Like, what's that about?
Two things. Your mic is off, and I think that question would be more appropriate for the dimensional variance. No problem. So this is the use. Use as a duplex is the question at hand.
Okay.
Very well.
I would like to save that question for that aspect.
Cool beans. Any other discussion or comments on this use variance request? Hearing none, Mr. Eldridge, could I have a roll call vote on the use variance only?
We'll start with Turpinning,
Yes.
Lager. Yes. Carroll,
Yes.
Doan,
Yes.
Harrington,
Yes.
Vanden Hamburg.
Yes.
The use variance request has passed. Do I happen to have a motion for the first dimensional variance application?
I make a motion for dimensional variance from Chapter 5, 5.35E for 331 Ingleside Terrace to authorize a 0 setback for steps and an elevated walkway for the north side yard where a 3-foot setback is required.
Thank you. Will there be a second?
Second.
I appreciate it. Now there will be discussion about the dimensional variance.
I just was wondering about the, accessibility for people that are in wheelchairs. I'm not seeing anything in the feasibility rendering that, where I can see. I mean, maybe, can you guys see it on here? I don't see anything that shows where wheelchairs are accessible in this.
I did not.
Okay.
Mr. Eldridge, are we allowed to ask the applicant, or?
Sure. Yeah, you can bring the applicant back up.
Thank you. That is a good question. Ingleside Terrace is a particular, as it was said by Mr. Lager, type of property, and most of the houses sit about 10 to 15 feet higher than the actual street do, and this is one of 5 properties that I own along Ingleside Terrace. The properties that are along the east side of Ingleside Terrace typically are on grade with the road, and they allow a little bit more ease of access for such as wheelchair and whatnot. However, on the west side of Ingleside Terrace, where the properties sit up 10 to 15 feet, almost every one of them, including this one in its present form right now, prior to even rebuilding the stairs that we're talking about, it has a 15-foot concrete steps that are pretty dilapidated right now. You can't see them in the renditions, as those will be the post-development. But presently, coming right from the very front doors to Ingleside, there's about a 10-foot wide concrete stairs that used to be the main access. Nope, actually, if you do the forward-facing one, but all things considered, whereas in many of my properties, I make distinctive choices to put 36-inch wide doors, 36-inch wide doorways, hallways. That is something that we consciously build into the renovations that we put into these houses. In this situation, the feasibility for a ramp would be probably cost prohibitive, and for the fact that the house has no at-grade access to begin with, it wouldn't be feasible to include a handicap access for this property specifically, in my professional opinion.
But see, that's why I wanted to talk about it from the use perspective then.
Please elaborate.
Well, I mean, he said you're intentional about the width of, like, the doors, but, like, how are they supposed to get up there?
And thank you. This is going to be a property that's going to be probably more prohibitive for a handicap accessible person.
Just why? Because it's elevated?
Because, yeah, I mean, it would probably add about $20,000 to build a ramp to go back and forth, which would need to happen about 3 or 4 times from the actual road. And specifically, it's not a property that I had intentional or was previously laid out for handicap accessibility.
What did the people that did it before do? Like it was the people that used it as a duplex in the 90s. How did they manage that? What
I couldn't
happened?
say specifically as I wasn't there to know that, but there are stairs leading up to Unit 2. And so the
Okay.
Wheelchair standpoint,
Okay.
and I don't believe that the main level would have been very much either, given the
I'm just
existing wall.
asking.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
thank
love
you.
these ideas, and they're things that I take into consideration with seriousness, too.
Okay, I'm just asking. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, Ms. Harrington?
No, thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Any other board members want to express or discuss this request? I'll be supportive of it. I like how Mr. Lager said it. It seems all 3 of the requests are in line with previous use, and particularly this in the next request seems like it's been worked out with the neighbor and been well thought through. So I'll be in support of this variance request. Anybody else? Very well. Mr. Eldridge, could I have a roll call vote on the first dimensional request only?
Lager? Yes. Carroll?
Yes.
Doan?
Yes.
Harrington?
Yes.
Vanden Hamburg?
Yes.
Herpening?
Yes.
The motion passes and the application has been approved for that variance request. Is there a motion regarding the third and final pending application request?
I make a motion for a dimensional variance from Chapter 5, 5.35D for 331 Ingleside Terrace to authorize a 5-foot setback for a porch on the west side of the structure where a 15-foot rear yard setback is required.
Thank you very much. Will there be a second?
Second.
Thank you. Now we have discussion, expressing support or opposition, or discussion. I've already expressed my support for this variance request.
I'll also be in support of this last request. I think you should be commended. As long as I've sat on this board or sat here, I haven't seen this many mailings or emails sent in approval of a submitted application. So I think that speaks highly of your motivation to do things the correct way. So I think obviously if it's by any show of the approvals that you've had submitted on your behalf, then obviously you're doing something correct, and I really commend you for that.
Thank you. Not hearing other discussion. Mr. Eldridge, could I get a roll call vote?
We'll start with Ms. Harrington?
Yes.
Doan?
Yes.
Carroll?
Yes.
Lager? Yes. Terpening?
Yes.
Vanden Hamburg?
Yes.
The third and final variance request has been approved. All 3 variance requests were approved. Will the board secretary now read the next application into the record?
An application for a variance for provisions of the zoning ordinance has been filed with the Zoning Board of Appeals by Oakland Financial Company, LLC, for 3919-3921 Oakland Drive, 1823 Hazelnut Avenue, 3903 Ruthin Road, 1609 Whites Road in the Residential Single Dwelling District, RS5, and Residential Multi-Dwelling District, RM15. The applicant is requesting the following variances. 1, a variance from the Natural Features Protection Ordinance, Chapter 50, Section 50-6.2H, to authorize the development of to encroach into a protected slope which has a grade greater than 20% and protected slope setback. This will impact approximately 4.5 acres of man-made and natural slopes. It will also impact 3.5 acres of man-made and natural slope protected setback area. 2, a variance from the Natural Features Protection Ordinance, Chapter 50, Section 50-6.2G, to authorize a 17.5% increase, allowing for removal of 67.5% of woodlands where 50% is the maximum permitted. Please note this request will not change the zoning classification of the properties. This is a request for variance only regarding the items described above.
Thank you. Will the applicant step to the podium, sign in, provide your name into the microphone, and explain your request in the 10 minutes provided?
All right. All right.
Thank you. Okay, John, I'll control it. Okay. Good evening. My name is John Fulling, and I am the golf course superintendent at Kalamazoo Country Club, where I've been for 30 years. And thank you to the board members for hearing our appeal tonight. I'd like to introduce who's going to speak and who's with our group tonight. First, Tim Stewart from the engineering firm Hurley & Stewart, Noah Schneider from CSM, our general contractor, Todd McDonald from CSM, our contractor, and J.J. Henn, who is representing ownership tonight. So thank you. We've got a request for variance for two variances from the NFP, where we were a week ago or so, and received their approval and recommendation to move forward. And we're happy to be able to come tonight and show you the plan and the reasons for the need of variance. I'm going to start out by kind of summarizing what the development is proposed to look like. You can see on the screen in front of you, this is the former lakeside property at essentially 3921 Oakland Drive, which sits between Oakland Drive and White's Lake. And on this property, proposed to have a clubhouse. This would function as a country club golf facility, and a clubhouse, a golf performance center, which would be pro shop and teaching, and then an indoor tennis facility for tennis. There would be a 9-hole or golf short course made up of par 3 holes. And also on here we've got sensitive to the NFP requirements include woodland slopes, water features, wetlands, and where we originally brought a plan that was larger, the buildings were larger, the buildings were in different spots, and through the direction of the NFP went back over a period of months and really redesigned about everything, made buildings smaller, moved them to the south, tried to get them into those areas where the former lakeside buildings were already sitting, where we weren't impacting as much, and went back, again, with mitigation plans for reforestation, things like that. And so, again, fortunately, after that, gained their recommendation to move forward. So I don't know if anybody's familiar with the former lakeside property, there were a number of buildings, mostly very old, but there was a brand new gymnasium built a few years ago that we're proud, at least we're going to be able to reuse that and keep it on site and use it actually as a gym. And if looking at it again, the new buildings, even though a little larger, are essentially located in about the areas where the former buildings were. Again, trying to reduce the impact to the NFP ordinance. Now it's Tim.
Hi there, Tim Stewart from Hurley and Stewart Engineers. I'm going to talk more specifically about our application for NFP variances that you have before you tonight. What you can see on this screen is an inventory of the existing NFP natural features for this property. So as part of our analysis, we've gone through and the highlighted portions represent the different NFP or the natural features that we're quantifying. The red hatches represent slopes that are man-made that are greater than 20%. The purple hatches represent slopes that are greater than 20% but are native or naturally occurring. And then the light green hatch represents existing woodlands. Now, we've gone through a very extensive process over the last probably at least six months, where we've developed what we'd like to put out here. We've quantified and identified the natural features. We've had an ongoing discussions with the Natural Features Protection Board. We've been in front of them, I think, 4 times now. And it's been a really good discussion. We are very much focused on reducing our impacts on these natural features. But as you can see, especially with the trees and the slopes, the natural features occur a lot, very much so around the existing development. We've concentrated our development on that central area, but there's no way to develop this responsibly without impacting the natural features to some point. Again, we've been in front of the NFP board many times. They've given us very constructive input. We've had 2 public hearings. I had more than a dozen residents come to my office. I sat down with them. Nobody was objected to the plan at all. So we've really taken time to, excuse me, to communicate what we want to do, and then again to be very, very sensitive. So what we're asking for you to tonight, we have the woodlands comprise 57.3% of the site. And per ordinance, we're allowed to remove up to 50% of those. But again, in order to fit this development out there, it's not possible to stay within that 50% limit. So we're asking for a 17.5% variance for that aspect. And then again, we are asking for slope and slope setback requirements, but as you can see by the numbers on the screen, the vast majority of those are to the man-made slopes that were built when the Lakeside School was constructed out there. We have very minimal impacts to the purple areas, which are the native slopes. We've really, again, tried to stay out of those and focus the development to the central part of the site. Yes, sir.
Back to that, that's a really informative slide.
Yep.
Sure.
See these turquoise lines going through it?
Yep.
And so where they go through the purple, is that where they impact the natural slopes?
Oh, Am I? There we go. The turquoise lines are lines that they're setback lines from the natural features per your ordinance. So the one closest to the lake represents, I think it's a 50 or 25-foot setback off of the water feature. The thicker one that cuts through the middle of the site represents a 500-foot setback. And so the criteria per the ordinance is that anything within 500 feet is a protected slope. So all of the red to the left of that thick blue line are not protected per ordinance. So that, as you can see, the majority of them are protected. No, both the red and the purple to the right of that thick light blue line are protected slopes. The red represents man-made that were constructed with Lakeside School. The purple are native slopes. Does that make sense?
Yep, thanks.
So I want to go on to our plan. We have a restoration plan that, John, do you want to touch on this a little bit?
Thank you, Tim. So, in our effort to be sensitive not only to the NFP, but what we do, and I've been in the golf business my whole life, and we work outside, we live outside. It's my world, and so very, very protective of it, and have always been. And so the opportunity to kind of rebuild something and make it better than it was is really exciting to me. So what you're seeing here is in the 4.5 and the 2.8 are the amount of woodland trees native to Michigan that we're going to put in, and then 2.8 acres of natural grasslands, again, native to Michigan, that we're going to put in on this site in the areas that you see. And the woodlands that we're going to plant are made up of both understory and overstory trees. We're going to put plants in that are century and legacy trees, native to Michigan, and focus not only on the sustainability of that woodland long-term and the grassland, but also on wildlife habitat. So which we've, again, always done, we work very closely with Steve Allen, wildlife biologist, have for 25 years. And when we do all this, we're going to be looking at corridors to the water, and we're going to be looking at plant materials that are beneficial to wildlife. It's very important to us. A golf course in an urban setting is a wonderful green space and a wonderful refuge for all kinds of wildlife. And so we're happy to have the opportunity to build that way. So the 4 point, we're going to, again, reestablish at least 4.5 acres of new woodland and at least 2.8 acres of native grasslands in this area.
And so I want to try to understand that percentage that I saw on that slide. With that new woodland, 4.5 acres added back, the overall reduction, if you counted old woodland and new woodland together, would only be 53% of the current woodland feature. And so,
Correct.
Okay, very good, thanks.
And that's the amount you're allowed to do. 50%.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, so actually the 53% would be only the woodlands. It does not count the 2.8 acres of grasslands, since obviously they're not woods, but it is a natural area that we're creating. And so, we're allowed to remove per ordinance up to 50%. So it gets us much, much closer. We're not there yet, but we're very close. Pardon me? Oh yeah. If you do count the 2.8, I think I have the number. It puts us below 50%. I think we're at like 47 or 42. I've got the number, but it's below 50.
I have a question. What specifically is holding you back from adhering to the 50%?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
The big issue that's holding us back is the development is, if I go back a couple slides, there are woodlands all over this property. And so there's no way to develop it without impacting the woodlands. To me, the question is, what is the quality of those woodlands? Per your ordinance, it's very general. It's a tree that gets to be at least 50 feet tall, regardless of species. We've had 2 arborists out there. The quality of the woodlands out there is very low. And in fact, a lot of these areas are invasives, are not naturally occurring, and so we're not able to develop the property the way we'd like to, without impacting those woodlands. From the slope perspective, it's all concentrated right in the middle there, and there's the huge majority is the man-made slopes. Does that answer your question? Anything you want to add to that, John?
Yeah, and to directly answer your question, what's holding us back from moving the development into an area that doesn't have trees? Which is the right question and a good question. So the value of that property, first of all, the second phase of this is going to be tied in with the current golf course at 1609, and so you're going to have a short course on the 3921 parcel, which is going to be done first, the golf course later, and so that clubhouse, the member area, the area where it all ties together, is really up in that corner. It just so happens that it's up open.
John, can you please direct your comments into the microphone?
Sorry, I apologize. I was so focused on, but and it has to work and it has to flow, and you have to be able to get from one side to the other and use both, and that's the right place to put it. And we have had that question. Why don't you just move it to some place where there aren't trees? Well, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And so what we've done again over the course of many months is continue to try to reduce and redesign and get it with the least impact, and then mitigate as much as we can, and then be, again, great stewards of the environment as we've always been, continue to be. So that's really why. I mean, it needs to be up there. And the whole lower half now, between the wetlands, the south side, all those woodlands down there, which actually have value, the north side, as Tim stated, from an actual woodland value standpoint, not that much, but we've left all of that, and that will be like that forever. That's so.
Okay. All right. So what I hear you saying essentially is, with the natural slopes and the man-made slopes and the scrub woods, that portions of it that really aren't that great, and I've seen those before, that you really can't, to your way of thinking, achieve your objectives and stay within that 50%, like with the size of your buildings or doing something different to decrease your footprint at the end of the day. This is really what you need. You can't stay within that 50%, and so you're asking for that 17.5 variance for the removal of the woods. I mean, is that?
It is absolutely, and it is not without lack of trying, painstaking trying, and I think we've done about everything that we can think of, and this, yes, I will agree with that. It really is. It really is.
All right, thank you.
We did have a couple other things we wanted to show you too, if we have time. I know we're running out of time, so is that okay with the questions?
Please.
Thank you. So let me go forward. I did want to just touch on stormwater. I know it's not exactly pertinent to our request, but we've had questions come up from neighbors and other community members about how we're going to be. My mic, oh, it's on. So this is a stormwater master plan. This is one of the elements that will be designed in detail, will be scrutinized by the city. Because this is an NFP district, we actually have higher standards in terms of both quantity and quality for stormwater management out here, which we fully intend to meet. We have already done a study of the watershed area, and which includes many of the homes to the north and all of the property. All of this will be managed, treated, and then discharged at an acceptable rate to the wetland system to the south and east, and then ultimately to the lake, which is where everything heads now. We're going to make vast improvements to the stormwater system out there, but I know there have been some concerns about, are we going to send water to the west, or are we going to close off water from the north that comes onto the property? And that is not the intention by any means. That will be, again, a process we'll be going through with site plan approval. But as you know, we can't even apply for site plan approval until we have our variances in hand. So we're coming to you now. We've done the preliminary engineering, but those will all be finalized as we move forward. One other thing I wanted to just touch on from an overview standpoint, that Noah was just going to touch on the phasing of this project so you can get the big picture.
Sure. Thank you. Noah Schneider with CSM Group, and did want to touch briefly on the phasing. As we've alluded to, this is part of a two-phase project at the Kalamazoo Country Club development area. The second phase would be attempting to work on the existing course and layout of the country club that sits in that location. So we have additional opportunities once we get to that phase of the project to offset any of these removals that we're talking about asking a variance for today. But of course, that is an additional phase, and that's why we're seeking a variance today for the current known quantities. We know we can drastically improve that if we were to include things to the north, but that is a future development that will come into play once the current development would be completed.
Sure, yeah, thank you. Again, thank you very much for having us and hearing us, and happy to do whatever you would like me.
Yeah. Thank you. Would, maybe this is for staff or the engineers, if we wanted to put a apartment complex on this large parcel because there's a housing shortage, would we be having the same NFP problems?
I'll be glad to answer that. I mean, yes, any development that was proposed for this site would come under the NFP standards.
Thank you.
If they wanted to expand upon buildable space, is that what you're?
If you were to redevelop it, I mean, if you were just to reoccupy the existing buildings, then no. But if you were to redevelop the site.
So just like how with the previous applicant, it's just not the accommodation just can't be made for people that need wheelchair accessibility, because the property just doesn't, like, it doesn't accommodate the people that need wheelchairs. So, like, why can't we apply that same logic to this particular property to maintain the integrity of the natural resource protection?
Well, this development, what they're building, this commercial building will be handicap accessible.
I'm not talking about handicap. I'm talking about the concept of maintaining the integrity of what the land can accommodate. And so if we were to redevelop this space and reutilize the building, we're 17.5% is pretty significant. So why can't we apply that same frame of reasoning to this particular piece of property, this particular property?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my apologies, Jeff.
Okay.
So Yeah, and I think what the applicant was laying out is that because of the positioning of the trees, there's no way to work around the woodlands.
I understand.
Yeah, so you're trying,
But okay. I think that we've been, for the past few months, we've been trying to establish some continuity in the way that we interpret these 6 points. And I'm still learning. I'm still learning about order of operation. I'm still learning about, like, theoretically how we should be interpreting what these 6 points are. And I think that with the previous applicant, there was a very pronounced perspective surrounding, like, okay, well, we're going to develop this. Previously, they've utilized it for this purpose, and like, we just can't accommodate it. So it was used for this before, so let's just keep that precedent set. And so I voted accordingly. With this particular property, it has been utilized, it has been developed, it's been used for business. It was lakeside. And so maybe if we were to maintain the integrity of the natural resource protection, then maybe we would just apply that same frame of reasoning. Like, okay, this just doesn't accommodate an expansion for a golf course because we want to maintain the integrity of the natural resource protection. That's the frame of reasoning. So if there's a shift that I need to be making, I'd like to make that shift.
okay, I'd like to make a suggestion to the board chair. We've got Jamie McCarthy here, our sustainability coordinator, who can speak more specifically about the unique circumstances of the site.
Please.
Can I get this microphone? Thank you. And by the way, Chair Carroll, unfortunately, the microphone at that station is dead, so when we take phone calls, I might have to bounce back and forth.
Thank you.
Director Harrington, thank you for that question. I think one thing that's a bit unique about placing natural features in our zoning ordinance is maybe unlike some of the physically developed characteristics of a site, our natural features will kind of change and move over time. If you can imagine trees over 10 and 20 years, there'll be woodlands around a building that weren't there when they were built 20 years ago. So we may have been able to build in that way back when that school was developed. And I'll also mention that the natural features protection regulations or standards didn't exist when those buildings were constructed, so I really can't say whether that same type of development would be allowed today. So you're really evaluating in today's time, what is still within the spirit of NFP, but would still allow, a permitted use like this to move forward. Does that help answer the question about whether a new use could work there with the old footprint?
Can I get more clarity about the mitigation of the impact? Can I hear more about that from your perspective, based on what their development is going to be? Do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah,
because he said that they were mitigating it by putting in, and then it would be under the 50%. Can you speak to that so that I can have a clear perspective?
Yeah, so the staff recommendation to the NFP Review Board was positive for this plan. There was some earlier plans that were brought forward at the beginning of the year that I think getting to this point, staff felt like it showed a good faith effort to try to save as much as could be saved, and then the idea of replacement was the balance that was required. We felt like that balance was being met in a variance request. So that offset isn't required. It isn't required that an applicant come forward and plant more trees. They could have just asked to have, any percentage of variance, but being able to replant, staff felt like that was a very good balance. We'll get, new healthy trees. A golf course like this is going to be committed to keeping those trees in, good condition, as they're going to have, activities going on there and an vested interest in making sure that those are well maintained. and will help remove invasives. And, you know, in the end, it felt like the plan that was presented to NFP would likely result in high quality and nice quality woodland and landscape there that isn't existing right now. It's an area that hasn't been kind of maintained in the natural feature sense for quite some time.
Can I understand why you brought up the development being, like when the original development was erected, why you brought that up? Certainly we have seen in recent history the implications of development, and our collective consciousness has become more advanced surrounding like the importance of natural resource protection and the implication on humanity and the entire ecosystem. So why was that brought up to me?
One of the earlier designs that the applicant brought forward had a much larger building footprint, and it encroached a lot more into the more northern woods or woodlands there. And so this new design that was presented last month was responsive to some of the NFP Board's biggest concerns, which was try to protect more of the northern woods, which were in better condition, maybe a little older growth, more mature. They also really highlighted the slope along White's Lake and the lake itself as the priority natural feature. Because here I think we're dealing with slopes and woodlands and wetlands that all sort of are spread out and overlap. So they wanted to see that kind of shifted out of that area if they could, and so the new design is responsive and shifts the building footprint south, makes it smaller, still respects and is set back from the wetlands, and still really is conscious of that slope along the lake, which is the natural slope, the most important natural feature that that board identified. And then there's also some talk about the design and the building utilizing the slope there for some, green building techniques that they plan to incorporate into the development. And so I think that also gave the board that balance they were looking for, that this is, geothermal heat, some of those green building techniques that they're able to use the slope there to help benefit the building and the environment overall.
For me, it feels there's something in the energy, in the immaterial that I know that are not, this is not a tactile perspective, but something in the immaterial feels very uncomfortable for me about that young black male dying there, and now we're developing this into a golf course. That just doesn't, it feels, I don't like how that feels, but that's not, I need to put that on record, but it just feels uncomfortable for me. And then coupled with the 17.5%, I'm not saying that it's informing how I think I'm interpreting this vote.
Okay, the one thing I want to add to Jamie's comments, and thank you, Jamie, for being here tonight. Ms. Harrington asked, or was asking about the former development and why that keeps being brought up. And one of the things is the placement of buildings in low-lying areas of the property, which resulted in them essentially grading back all the land around it. So basically creating slopes behind some of these building sites, which is, which is only adding to, and that's part of the reason why they mapped out the native slopes in comparison with the man-made slopes, because the Lakeside Academy manipulated the landscape quite significantly because of the positioning of the buildings, and in fact, created, bad, stormwater management situations as well. But so I hope that helps a little bit on the prior development.
I mean, y'all gonna develop it anyway. It's gonna be developed is what I'm hearing. The space is gonna be developed, and they've been conscious about what that's gonna look like as it relates to the green space and the mitigation of all the things. I understand completely.
Jamie, I have a question. Have you decided yet how many trees are going to be planted on that 4.5 acre parcel?
I would let the development team come forward. At the NFP meeting, they did have a visual, a map they had created that talked about the different size and the mix of species replanted in that 4.5 acre woodland space. Okay. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, yeah, we did have that here as well. And specific numbers we don't have, but what our goal is to sorry, they keep doing that.
Just an estimate would be nice.
Probably into the 800 to 1,000 range.
All right, thank you.
That's both understory and open. So, yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
if I may comment, for granting a variance from the NFP overlay district standards, and I think the primary thing that discussion is focusing on, the primary criteria is the first one set out in the NFP ordinance. The parcel cannot be reasonably utilized for its own use without the requested relief. And if you look at that criteria and apply it, the question isn't whether it can be utilized without the requested relief, but can it reasonably be utilized? We're dealing with a use, a zoned use that is permitted in the zone, and we're determining, or the board is determining, whether that can be reasonably utilized. So, in effect, what I think that standard is requiring is for the board to determine, is the application, the literal application of the ordinance, does that create a practical difficulty in implementing and developing this use? So as with setbacks and other non-use variances, and this is a non-use variance like a dimensional variance, there may be circumstances and conditions why there may be appropriate for a variance. So that's what you're looking at. I hope that clarifies it a little bit. And perhaps, Ms. Harrington, this goes without saying, and please don't interpret this as being insensitive on my part. I understand your sensitivity with the history, but that's not really relevant to our determination here.
Thank you. You did shed light on the reasonable aspect. I was going to ask staff for a summary of the zoned usage. I know this is an approved usage, but what other types of things, for my knowledge, could be developed there, or could it be used for?
Well, the property is RS5, which is residential single dwelling, and RM15, residential multi-dwelling. So you could have a single-family development, you could have more medium-density multifamily development on part of the property. Given the size of it, there could be like a cluster housing development. So there are residential options, but the recreational facilities is also permitted by right, and that's what this falls under.
Okay.
So
just for, we would be here again if apartments or single-family homes wanted to go in, because it's, I'll stop there. Thank you. I answered my own question. Are there other questions of the applicant? Thank you. Now those in favor are invited to speak at the podium. Seeing none, now those opposed are invited to speak at the podium. Please sign in and state your name in the microphone. You'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Emily Demarest. I am a resident of the Oakwood neighborhood and a member of the Oakwood Association Board. And I am here to express my strong disagreement with the decision by the NFP Review Board to grant relief from the standards for this property. The parcels purchased are some of the largest remaining natural areas in the city and part of a wildlife corridor extending along the Portage Creek watershed. Given our ever-worsening climate crisis, it is extremely irresponsible for the city of Kalamazoo to allow the removal of trees and disturb wetland areas beyond the NFP standards. I'd like you to think about this in a little bit of a larger environmental context. Each tree cut, high quality, low quality, doesn't matter, instantly releases an average of a ton of carbon into the atmosphere and eliminates habitat for 100 of species instantly. You can replant, but it takes a couple decades to begin to replace what was lost. The U.S. Golf Association found their own studies in 2012 that golf courses across the country suck up more than 2 billion gallons of water. This is at a time when we have the largest mega drought in over 1,000 years happening in the western part of our country. The turf grass, which there'll be over 30 new acres of turf grass on this property, will be maintained with extensive use of pesticides and chemicals for fossil fuels burning for continuous mowing of this property. And this is how environmental devastation happens. It's through attrition of an acre at a time, because people always assume that there's more somewhere else. There's more trees somewhere else, there's more water somewhere else, and right now we're facing a situation we cannot grow food on significant portions of our land in this country because we have abused our resources. Clearly the golf course is going to happen in some capacity. This is their property, they own this, and they're legally right to do whatever they want with it. But I think that what we need to do is hold the line on our existing environmental standards. That's the only thing we can do. We can try to hold the line. And I'll just say, close with this, that the NFP vote to pass this along with you in approval was not unanimous. The two people who opposed the passage of this allowance for the removal are wildlife biologists who had serious concerns about this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there others?
This is Janice Hall. I live at 1950 Stevens Avenue in Kalamazoo. 3 minutes seems a very short amount of time to respond to so much time given to the requester, and I have a lot of notes. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to speak quickly and hope that my meaning is not lost. I did want to say a few things that are representative to the neighborhood and the things I've heard tonight. Initially, I am a bit shocked. One of the golf course representatives founded his statements on the basis that no one has objected to the plans. This could not be further from the truth, and it seems to me to speak to the lack of awareness and engagement provided by this group. I'm a business analyst. I plan projects for a living, and I'm not familiar with stepping forward on project approvals with this little amount of data. So we seem to be stepping through a process of getting closer and closer to the ordinance, but it's following a basis of negotiation that I don't understand. Even where use is approved, the ordinances are there for a reason, as my colleague stated. We live in a community. Consideration should not simply go to the wish list of the golf course and things that they might come up with. The Oakwood neighborhood, and very significantly, the local wildlife, will be impacted by even short-term changes. Representatives of the golf course have, to my knowledge, not represented any financial hardship data that would be realized by following the ordinance, acknowledging that there is an option for no further development. Approval to date was, as stated before, not unanimous, and was provided with acknowledgement that there was lacking information, so nothing yet necessarily to object to, not an approval of plan details. As we called out in a letter that I crafted and sent in alliance with the Oakwood Neighborhood Association, data and graphics were lacking, and I see no improvements made since the last session. We keep hearing about woodlands that are or are not of value, but it's all provided in general language with no specifics and no detail provided on the quality of woodlands that would be impacted, lacking substance on types of trees or requirements for the final future state would look like, which I find very odd for proceeding with a project at this level and this impact without that data. As mentioned before, the last board review, the Oakwood Association has provided questions that have still not been addressed. In addition to the fact that many questions have not been addressed, graphics are still lacking in detail and unclear. Instead, in response, general language is used with indications that they'd like to do the right thing, but never get to the details of how. Never mind that even in the sweeping statements, these are tangential and
As a question, if you could, do you have any other salient points to make? Can we turn the microphone back on?
view. I'm hoping that we'll take the time to get the data that's needed and requisite to make an informed decision for moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there others wishing to speak in opposition? Seeing none. Oh. My apologies. I need new glasses. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Mary Spradling. I didn't write up a nice, neat thing to say to you. I look at those graphs up there, and I don't really understand what they're showing in many cases. They mentioned, you know, they're adding 2-point-something acres of grasslands, but I didn't see any grasslands. I wondered if some of those little tan areas that were sprinkled around here and there and here and there and here and there through the golf course were their grasslands. If they are, I don't really see that as wildlife habitat because golf balls tend to kill birds if they're sitting in the grass and golf balls go in there. I mean, a 2-point-something acre grassland would be great, but I didn't see where that was. Also, you know, you're talking about the quality of the trees and the north woods and the south woods. The woods to the north is full of beautiful, mature oak trees, and I believe they're interested in taking at least 16% of them out of there, which isn't terribly large, but as Emily said, that's a whole lot of carbon that's being released and carbon dioxide that's not being soaked up by those trees. They keep talking about how narrow that area is between the lake and the woods, and I don't really understand. It doesn't look that narrow to me. And I think, you know, not removing a big hunk of the oak woods would be preferable, and I don't see why it would really impede them from not being able to do, you know, whatever their golf course wants to do in those woods. So I'm sorry if that's not very organized, but that's what I had to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Are there others that would like to speak in opposition? Seeing none, do we have any call-in comments? Thank you. Administrator Eldridge, do you have staff comments?
Yes, I do have a few staff comments to make. and I'll try to be as succinct as possible. I mean, a lot of information has been put out tonight on this, and, first of all, talking about special circumstances related to this parcel, and I should say these parcels. So we're looking at 55 acres of land. The golf course itself is well over 100, where the current KCC golf course is. So this 55 acres of land that they're looking to redevelop does have one main native slope that runs essentially along the eastern edge of White's Lake, and there's also old growth woodlands along that same eastern edge of White's Lake, and those are the reasons that the development proposed has been shifted further to the west. In fact, I attended the February NFP meeting, and then I attended the one on May 24th, and so I saw the alterations, the shifting of the buildings to the west, the changing of the location of the driveway, or shall I say private drive, extending west to Oakland Drive, moving that north of where the wetlands are. There's been a lot of efforts made to figure out how to accommodate the facilities needed for this recreational use in this space and put as much of it as possible in the former Lakeside campus site where you have the low quality tree growth, less old growth, woodland, and of course a lot of man-made slopes. So, and as far as the results of the situation that are not created by the applicant, one of the largest one that's been pointed out again over and over is the fact that there are a lot of man-made alterations to the terrain, and that also impacted the woodlands back when that campus was developed. As far as the literal interpretation of this ordinance, the literal interpretation would, as Attorney Baer pointed out, it would limit the redevelopment of this site if you had to work around the groupings of trees, and you'd have to spread out the buildings rather than consolidating, the main campus, we'll call it, for the country club facilities, more to that, more over towards the White's Lake side, but off of that native slope and away from those woodlands along the edge of the lake. The other thing is as mentioned, the redevelopment effort will be, focused as much as possible, outside of the old growth woodland areas. So that is down the edge of the lake on the eastern side, as well as extending in a southwesterly direction through the wetland area. So, there's substantial areas that are not being impacted by this redevelopment plan. I guess that's what I'm trying to point out. And I do want to touch on the level of detail, because this is just a step of the review and approval process for this development plan. The NFP variance requirement, any development project that requires a variance, that matter has to be resolved before they can enter the site plan review process. So based on the outcome of this meeting tonight, the applicant will know whether they are on track to proceed to site plan review, and that would be when they would get the detailed engineering work done and be able to provide a full engineered understanding of the drainage patterns for the site, more specificity on where the improvements are going to go on the property. So I understand there's concern that this plan being presented tonight is lacking a lot of detail. It is lacking a lot of detail because is specifically focused on talking about slopes, slope setbacks, and woodland areas. It's not really intended to cover, all the ins and outs and minute detail of this development plan. That is, that engineering work comes next, and that goes to the Site Plan Review Committee, and that site plan becomes another public document that will be available on the city's website for anybody to view and comment on. So there are upcoming steps, for this project that folks can continue to provide feedback on. And with that being said, the recommendation put forward by the NFP Board is to approve both the slope and slope setback as well as the woodland variance request. So that should be treated as one variance request tonight. And then secondly, the NFP Board heard very clearly that the applicant was intent on doing replanting, but they wanted to ensure that a significant level of replanting occurred. And so the condition that's stated in the staff report lays out that the NFP Board, in their recommendation, stated that the applicant shall replant at least 2.5 acres of native grasses and at least 4.5 acres of woodlands. So that is we would also like to have that condition as part of the variance tonight.
Thank you.
Yes. And the condition is that the applicant shall replant at least 2.5 acres of native grasses and at least 4.5 acres of woodland. 2.5 native grasses, 4.5 acres woodland.
Is that all, Mr. Eldridge?
That is it. Thank you.
They were trying, or what was that?
Go ahead, Jean.
Did she leave? Oh, there she goes.
Nope.
What'd you say that felt impressive to you about that?
Board, thank you. That the applicant has come forward through sort of multiple meetings with staff to make a good faith effort to adapt their original plan to be responsive to some of the main concerns of the NFP Review Board.
To the point that their good faith effort moved you and the board to the point that it positioned you to make their request allowable from your perspective and able to be supported.
Yes, that it was to a point that would get a recommendation, a positive recommendation from that board. Earlier meetings did not look like they may have gotten a majority positive in some of the early plans.
Okay, so what would make you feel as though you were not negotiating the standards of the NFP? Why would, at what point in that standard, as long as an applicant comes before you all with a good faith effort that you all deem to be a good faith effort, you're not sabotaging or going against the NFP standard, as long as they're making what's the algorithm for that?
Yeah, I think in this case, it seemed like the new shifting some buildings around, reducing some of the footprints were all positive things. If I had to speak for the dynamic of the board that evening, it seemed like the new piece that came forward was the commitment to replanting the woodland and grassland areas helped, I think, overcome that and feel as though the plan was more balanced than earlier plans.
Okay, thank you.
Was there any concern over the delay? I don't know much about ecology things, but the delay in destruction and replanting to the natural environment for the animals and whatever, was there any concern about the delay in the resetting of that?
I don't remember any comments from the meeting about the construction period. I feel like one of the board members did make a comment that he was in favor because the new planting plan, again, the addition of trees, young trees that would, kind of grow and, improve over time would be a positive thing, but I don't think there was any comment about the construction period. Pete, you were at that meeting too, so jump in if I missed something.
You're doing a great job.
One
The
last
hard
question.
part is, we weren't at that meeting.
Well, but it was recorded. That was the YouTube link.
I know. Please.
Sir, I have one more question. The grasslands, is it piecemeal or is it all in one place?
I'm sure it's going to be piecemeal, but I would have the applicant.
I'm hearing that it is going to be spread out through the golf course.
Are there any other questions?
When the NFP was concerned, for the planning stages, you had made statements that geothermal energy, other green incentives and advantages would be taken by the country club. And was that taken into consideration for the overall effect or the total amount of manipulation needed to re-landscape or repopulate the growth area for the to meet the needs of the NFP?
Could you repeat that?
Sure.
once?
So I guess the question more simplified is, there were green techniques that are going to be put in place. Does that help offset or mitigate? Was that taken into a consideration by the NFP board as part of their overall plan for this development?
Yes, I think that those were considered positive things that showed that the development was trying to be environmentally sensitive and be thoughtful in kind of how the building would have any lasting impacts on the environment.
Any other questions? Thank you. All right. Hearing no additional questions, is there a motion for the finding of fact?
I move that the finding of fact shall include all the information included in the notice of public hearing dated May 25th, 2022, and the agenda packet staff provided for this request. 212 notices of public hearing were sent, and at this point, 3 responses were received. One of those responses was from Raymond Peterson in support of the variance. There was also a response, 2 responses were received. One from Raymond Peterson in support and one from the Oakwood Neighborhood Association in opposition. Speaking tonight on behalf of the applicant were John Fulling from the Kalamazoo Country Club and Tim Stewart from Hurley and Stewart. They indicated the instant site is a more or less 55-acre site, known in Kalamazoo for being the former home of the Lakeside facility. Currently, the site is approximately 57% covered with protected natural features. It is the intent of the applicant to use this facility for a golf course and physical activity recreation center, that would include a clubhouse, a golf performance center, an indoor tennis facility, and a short 9-hole golf course itself. There's a newer gymnasium on the site that would be repurposed or reused in some way. This case came to the Zoning Board of Appeals after first going through the Natural Features Protection Board review process. That was indicated by staff and applicant as being a several-month process in which plans were revised on multiple iterations. That process resulted in the recommendation that is here before the board today. The applicant has indicated that without relief from the natural feature protection standards, because of where both the natural and the man-made slopes are, and because of the dispersion of the woodlands over the site, it wouldn't be possible for them to use this parcel for their intended permitted use. When they described the site, they pictured and showed where the mix of natural and man-made slopes were, and a map indicating where the woodlands are. Additional comments were made about those woodlands and slopes, indicating that the man-made slopes were a result of the former placement of buildings and a seemingly ad hoc addition of sloping around those buildings that happened in the past. Staff and applicant made comments regarding the nature and quality of some of the woodlands on the site, indicating that some of the trees have just sort of what oftentimes is referred to as scrub trees accumulated over time on the site and haven't been always maintained. I have the exact figure on how much is comprised of the woodland. Woodlands comprise currently 57.3% of the site. By right, applicant is allowed to remove up to 50% of that tree. They're asking for a 17.5% increase in that, so that they would remove 67.5% of the current woodlands. They've indicated that the recommended condition from the Natural Features Protection Board to add 4.5 acres of new woodlands and to add 2.5 acres of natural grasses is something that they would comply with and would actually add to the quality of the site for them. They've also stated that with the addition of that woodland, there would be a 53.6% reduction if you netted that out by the time that development is done of the woodlands. This will be a phased process, not only the process for getting approval, but the process for the development. Mr. Stewart indicated that issues such as stormwater plans and other critical decisions will come in the future. Staff also indicated regarding the phasing of this project that some of the lack of detail that had been alluded to in public comments would come at the site review process, which can't proceed until and unless, I suppose, the Zoning Board of Appeals approves a variance. Speaking in opposition for public comments tonight to this proposed plan were Emily Demarest. She spoke in large part regarding the environmental impact. Janice Hull, who spoke amongst other things about the lack of specificity in the plan, and Mary Springling, who also spoke in opposition. A lot of facts in here. I think I've hit the relevant ones in there, and so that's the motion.
I appreciate it. Is there a second to the motion of the finding of fact?
Second.
Second.
I'll take them. Now, we shall have a discussion. Oh, my apologies. I always skip the vote on the finding of fact. All those in favor of accepting the motion for finding of fact signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, the same. The motion for the finding of fact has passed. Now we will have a discussion where board members can express their support or opposition and discuss the application request.
Can we jump into calling my statements and questions irrelevant? I want to know what it's irrelevant to, Attorney Bear. Can you specify what it's irrelevant to? What was irrelevant that I said?
The past history is not a factor for consideration of this variance.
Can I understand why you're saying that?
How do you feel that it does relate to this variance?
So, when we're looking at...
In what way does this relate to
Because we're talking
the impact of the ordinance to use this property for the use? How does that affect?
Because we're talking about the spirit of the ordinance. That's why. And the spirit, when we're talking about defining spirit, so you have to understand, again, we have to be really clear that there are different things surrounding culture and the way that we interpret the economic vitality, shared prosperity in the municipal plan as it's outlined, and how we're defining spirit and how people interpret that. And so I don't have potentially the same perspectives about what spirit represent to you. But as it relates to the economic vitality and the way that we're choosing and opting to interpret how we're going to either be in support of or in opposition to the new developments that are happening, we have to take all of the layers of what occurred in that space into consideration. And as a displaced African in America, having a diaspora experience, the one that I have had in my family and my people's survival sojourn, and the blood that cries out from the land and the native peoples of this land, and the fact that we're willing to continue to negotiate, we've seen the implications of what that has meant for this country and the rest of the world. And we're still dealing with the implications of that now. So my perspective is that we take those things into consideration, specifically when we're willing to negotiate natural resource preservation in this particular development. That's why that's important to me. Spirit is directly defined as emotion and character. So character, in how we're developing this, the mental and moral qualities that are distinctive to this particular development. So that has everything to do for me why I would or would not be in a position to be supportive of this. So it wasn't irrelevant, my questions or my position on this. I just have a different cultural perspective about it. My bent surrounding it is just distinct from yours.
I think we can all...
I think you're reading something in here to my comments that was not intended. And
Okay.
I apologize.
Okay, thank you.
I did not mean to make this a cultural difference. I did not mean to make this a racial issue.
It's not a racial issue. It's not a racial issue. It's about a golf course.
Well, it's about natural features and preservation.
Absolutely, right?
Features and whether the use can be implemented
Correct.
without
All right, so I wasn't
And
irrelevant.
whatever,
Okay.
whatever may have happened in that property in the past or how it's used isn't necessarily a consideration.
For you, for me, it might be.
Well, I'm speaking in terms of the legal interpretation of
Well,
the ordinance.
and I am too, based on what the city of Kalamazoo outlines is important for this use variance and what the tenets are that we're supposed to be using to interpret whether or not we're in opposition or support of it. Says it right here, the spirit. And it goes on to even further outline that public safety and other varying things surrounding, like I interpret all of that, like I thought, in alignment with what we were doing here tonight. So,
Well, I think spirit is referring to the purpose and intent of the ordinance
I think that too.
in dealing with the natural features.
I think that too.
I'm glad we came to agreement at the end there.
Mr. Baird, you did read the standard. Could you repeat that?
Yes, just a moment here. I will pull up the actual standard. In fact, I can read all the standards. Okay, the criteria, relief from the NFP overlay district standards in section 50-6.2 may be granted when all the following conditions are met. Number one, the parcel cannot be reasonably utilized for its zoned use without the requested relief. That's the first standard. Number two, the extent of relief requested is the minimum needed to permit reasonable utilization of the site. Number three, it is demonstrated that the relief can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and will not substantially impair the intent and purpose of the NFP overlay district. And four, the requested relief is balanced by the use of conservation and/or green development tools and actions, such as utilizing stormwater BMPs from the Michigan Low Impact Development Manual that promote infiltration, restoration, or expansion of a natural feature on the site, or use of wild-type native plants or desired trees as detailed in Table 6.2-5, Replacement Tree List.
Thank you. So I think this is a difficult case for a couple reasons. I think one, most of the zoning appeals that we hear are to zoning issues, and that's what we're used to hearing. I think this is maybe the second time in the course of the past 2 or 3 years that I recall in which we've dealt with this natural features protection. So sorry to the applicant if we're like going on about that portion of it. When I hear these standards, whether this cannot be reasonably utilized for the permissible purpose, I find myself needing to rely on the applicant's statements in this. And when the representative from the Kalamazoo, John Fulling from the Kalamazoo Country Club, had indicated that because, based upon his experience working at country clubs and golf courses, that this could not be used for what the country club, the applicant, proposes. I don't have any evidence that that contradicts that, and so I rely on that, and I found that credible when he said that, based upon his experience and my assumption that he knows his job. With regard to whether this is the minimum variance that could be granted in this case, I find persuasive the process that was described to us by both the applicant, Jamie McCarthy, and Pete Eldridge, that this was a multi-month process with the Natural Features Protection Board, that it was an iterative process that changed over time, and that both sides I don't know if compromise is the right word. I don't think it was a negotiation. I think it was trying to get a better plan that met the needs of the natural features protection ordinances. And I find that fact that this came back with a recommendation from the Natural Features Protection Board really the best evidence that this is the minimum variance that would be needed for this site. And with regard to balancing both the conservation needs and the desires, needs of owner, developer to use the property for its business, I think the conditions that came to us from the Natural Features Protection Board, planting the 4.5 acres of woodland, planting the 2.5 acres of grassland, seems to me to persuasively balance conservation and restoration needs with the desire of, the golf course to have a good, nice, clean golf course and sports facility, I suppose. As such, based upon the procedure that's brought this case before us, the evidence presented to us, I'm going to be in favor of granting this variance with the condition.
Thank you. Are there other comments of opposition or support?
Following what Matt had just said, I fully anticipate that the country club moving forward, this is obviously not something that can be enforced, but we would hope that the concerted efforts that are shown in the process thus far would be considered in the future as well. In a perfect world, we'd replant every single one of those trees and eliminate all the hassle, but that's not a doable suggestion with the way that everything's laid out. And as an adamant woods person myself, going out, I understand that not every tree is a prime specimen of its kind, and that there will be some upkeep and manipulation of the undergrowth and the new consideration. But I also will be in favor, but on the terms that this is the bare minimum, and really if we could expect more, I would fully encourage that moving forward.
Thank you. Administrator Eldridge, I want to clarify for the entire board. The criteria of today's decision is not a use or a dimensional variance. It's the 4 criteria provided to us moments ago.
Well, it's a non-use variance, I guess the best way to put it. These are, there are specific standards which, for the NFP criteria, which essentially align very closely with the dimensional variance criteria that's what you're normally working with.
Is it appropriate to ask for those criteria to be supplied in our packets along with the other 2 sets of criteria?
Well, they are identical except for the first request.
Thank you. The first request...
The first criteria, excuse me.
I understood. Thank you for clarification. The minimum necessary criteria, does that apply to only the use they want? Or does the minimum apply to, it could be single-family housing, it could be multi-housing, it could be a golf course, it could be whatever else is allowed in the ordinance. Is the minimum standard applied to the use that the applicant wants or to all of the available?
It's applying to the use that is presented before the board that you're considering now.
Thank you.
It'd be the same as any dimensional variance. If somebody comes and wants to build a garage and has a setback issue, you're looking at the minimum relief necessary to
Thank you.
grant them relief.
I struggle with this NFP board. It's kind of difficult because I feel like we're put in the middle of this. But I understand the situation. I'm pretty environmental minded. What we got ahead of us in the next 20 years is going to be scary for the earth. So I'm supportive of the NFP, but it feels like it's puts us in a pickle. And I'd like to take the NFP out of it, NFP board out of it, their recommendation or opposition, and just make I have to make my decision on the criteria before me, not whether the NFP board said yes or no. Just like staff. Staff may be supportive, but that doesn't mean that's the decision I make. I appreciate the staff input, and I appreciate the NFP board's input. But what we're asked to do is make a decision based on the criteria given to us. I struggle with the NFP situation because of private property rights. Because now we're telling these people that own this property what they can and can't do with their trees or their swamp or their lawn. And I know that I'm just a little guy on a little lot in my house, but nobody's coming over to me and telling me I can't cut down a tree or I need to do certain things. So I struggle with the ability of a private property owner to do what they want with their property. Then again, there is a bigger picture than just one individual person's owned property, and that's the environment and our community. So I struggle a little bit with this NFP process, but I do appreciate their input nonetheless.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
May I interject? Thank you. So the NFP board is really the board that does the heavy lift here. I mean, they are the experts on the natural features. And so they have looked at this project at multiple meetings, and they have come up with a recommendation with a condition tied to it that allows preservation of many of the natural features on the site, as well as future replantings. And so that recommendation is before the board tonight to reaffirm, not to like disassemble it, but to reaffirm that this is, that this is on the correct track based on the criteria. And that's what the board is voting on tonight. Now, if there is information that staff should go back and collect and provide to the Zoning Board of Appeals to make an informed decision, I guess what I'm trying to say is if there's not a comfort level here, then there are steps we can take to, postpone action tonight and bring this back next month. I'm just trying to put that information out there.
I appreciate that because this is only, I think, the second case, as a member Lager had indicated, and I felt like when that came, and I'm not trying to muddy the water here, I'm trying to get to your point. I felt in that case it was pretty ambiguous what was recommended or asked of the board to decide on that previous case at the Bacchus property. Remember, I was the stickler on what does roughly or approximately, I wanted a number because my name is on this. I kind of felt that during this hearing a bit too, with the concern about detail. And I appreciate your offer. I don't know that I'll take you up on it, but other board members might. So
okay, and yes, and actually, I had passed along that information about the quantitative element of the recommendations that come to the ZBA, and that's why there's so much information in there about acreages on each element.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is a zoning ordinance. The NFP ordinance is a zoning ordinance. It's a little different than what this board has customarily dealt with, and this is the second time you're dealing with it. And it's relatively new to staff as well. So we are working out how to implement and deal with this. And we do have a little different element in the review here in that we have the introduction of the NFP Board. And why do we have the NFP Board and what are they to do? And I think maybe that question is answered, or those questions are answered, if we look at what the ordinance requires for the membership of the board. So what the ordinance says, at a minimum, the board must have at least one member with education or experience in each of the following features in this chapter: water resources, wetlands, plants and trees, slopes, and site development and building construction. So what the ordinance is intending is to have a review by people with some expertise and training there in order to give this board then the benefit of that expertise and that review by their recommendation. Now, is that saying that you just rubber stamp what they do? No, and I know you're not going to do that. And that's perfectly fine. It's not the purpose of this board to rubber stamp the staff recommendation. It's not the purpose of the board to rubber stamp the decision of the NFP board. But that is intended to give you some additional information, some input, some reassurance that this has been qualitatively reviewed. Like with any zoning ordinance, the application of that ordinance maybe isn't always fair based on the circumstances and conditions of the property. So that's why we had the review process and in this board to determine, is there a practical difficulty there that prevents this use that would otherwise, or someone else in the zone could make the same kind of use without any problems, and there needs to be some relief. The same as any variance request that comes from this board. The nature of the NFP ordinance and what we're dealing with there is a little different than setbacks. There are setback requirements within that ordinance, but it's a little different than all of that. So that makes the process a little different. A little reaching a comfort level when that's something this board hasn't dealt with. It makes it more difficult.
I don't want my comments to be misinterpreted as ungrateful or misunderstanding their expertise.
And I didn't interpret it that way.
Cool. Thank you.
I was trying to explain what the NFP board is intended to accomplish.
Yeah, and without them, we'd be more in the dark. Okay, I will end my comments with, I played on a lot of tree-laden golf courses in my time. I don't know that we have met the standards of minimum necessary criteria. I don't know that this request is the minimum necessary to allow them to have a golf course, a tennis facility, and a pro shop. Are there any other opposition or supportive comments? I would entertain a motion to delay a decision this evening, but it would need to come with specific reason and request of information, there would need to be a reason why we would delay.
I would like to get more clarity on these standards surrounding natural resource, natural features protection. I'm more involved than attributing my previous comments to, or reducing them to an issue of race. This is much more complex. But I would caution us against, calling the way people assimilate information and the scope, the scope through which we arrive at how we come up with our decisions. I would caution us against, calling people irrelevant, that is, and their statements and how they're managing information and nuance, specifically as it relates to this particular issue, because I think that it speaks to, I don't need a delay. I think what you said surrounding this is their property. They get to make a determination about what they want to do on their property. I think there's that. But I think that my issue is the fact that this is at least the second time that we've had to contend with what I feel is a standard that has been negotiated to protect natural features. And when that comes up for me, it makes me think about the peripheral implications of, again, what's being presented to us and why the development is taking place, like under the auspices of like how this property was able to be acquired, who gets to make up the rules, who has access, all of those different things, and how that all interplays together, and how we get to develop things in this community for what we say is shared prosperity and economic vitality. Like we continue to create space and make accommodations to negotiate standards. And it makes me think about, I can't detach from the fact that I understand what negotiating values has meant to this community and to the world. That's the reason why I need more clarity from the natural features protection. I need to get very clear on what their willingness is to, or like to negotiate what these standards are. Specifically, if I'm going to be in the conversation about how to interpret those standards so that we can make determinations like this. I don't have a problem with a golf course or whatever they want to build there. I mean, that's not what I'm talking about. It's not, that's not, and I would implore us to think more broadly and expand our vocabulary surrounding why I made all the statements that I made before. It's exactly what I just said now. Let's think beyond that and think about again, what those standards are. So I don't need a delay. I don't have a problem with your golf course, guys. I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with the standards.
Mr. Chair, can I just interject? And Ms. Harrington made some great points. But what I want to say is, without the NFP standards, we wouldn't be having this discussion. There'd be no NFP board. This project would already be in site plan review and wouldn't have gone through probably half a dozen iterations of where buildings were going to be placed and countless hours of mapping the natural features on the site. So, having the ordinance we have allows those natural features to be considered for any redevelopment project that, in the NFP overlay parcels around the city. And so it is, it's not a negotiated thing. It's the applicant demonstrating how they're protecting the natural features to the best of their ability, yet still trying to develop the property. And just as another quick example, on Stadium Drive, we had a building, a new cannabis shop, and that was in the NFP zone on the south side of Stadium Drive. And the building was going to go deep into the property, causing elimination of more woodlands, construction of large retaining walls in the sloped areas, And, this discussion went all over the board as far as how that could be resolved, only because there was the NFP ordinance in place so that we could have that discussion. Otherwise, they would have just said, here's our site plan, we're going to put the building as far south as we can. And at the end of the day, the city planner actually granted an administrative adjustment, allowing the building to be positioned 50 feet further north, pulling the retaining wall further north on the property, saving wetlands, reducing the impact in the sloped areas. So what I'm trying to say is, there is a give and take, but what's happening here is the natural features are now part of the discussion where they weren't so
But they
much
should
before.
be. That's good. That's good that they're
Yes,
part of
it is good, but the NFP ordinance is not to cause no development to occur. It's to find that balance where we're protecting those features and allowing reasonable use of the land.
That's a valuable comment. I appreciate that. Just a little bit of growing pains here with this new not process, but new resource to our community, the NFP. So I'm done with my comments. Are there any others before I entertain a motion?
Nobody needs a delay? You guys okay over there?
And I appreciate what the constituency has said, the neighbors have said about this too. I think we need, I don't know if it's a delay, I just think we need some clarity. And I would like to think that.
Let me get to the bottom of that.
Yeah.
What would the.
But they said that they weren't engaged with Jeff, like they said they were not engaged with, and that's directly a reflection of this particular development. And I think that that should be honored. I think that their perspectives about this should be honored. And I think that that informs my decision also, because I don't like that they were not heard in this, and they said that they were accounted for, and they were not.
Well, they were given public notice, and they did show up here.
Right, but in terms of that being a cohesive interplay moving forward in the future, like they have said, the people that want to develop this property said, yeah, we haven't received any opposition from the people that live around here. And at least 3 people showed up and said that's just not true. And so I think that that also is an aspect that needs to be taken into consideration. And, and also, again, reflected in this conversation as it relates to our determination, because we solicited for their position. We asked for their comments about it, and they were not taken into consideration according to them. So there's that.
Mr. Chair, if I could just respond. So, yes, I'm glad we've got those comments on the record tonight, but this is not the end of the approval process. This is one step, and then it goes to site plan review. So first of all, this isn't the end of the road, and this project is getting permits and dirt's being moved. And secondly, some of the comments made tonight about the lack of specificity and detail, again, as I mentioned, that's what comes with the next phase with the site plan review. So I want that to be understood. Now, as far as the carbon release from cutting down trees and all that sort of, those environmental concerns, those are real. And that, that does happen, but, this is intended to be a balance, as mentioned, to allow for redevelopment, but still protect the natural features.
The middle path. Were there any questions or concerns or comments over here?
To my way of thinking, from what I have heard, I feel that the natural features protection folks have done due diligence, and that the people from the country club are working in good faith. And the way, they said that they've met with the NFP committee before and decrease their footprint. And, you know, this is just one step. They can't move forward with, you know, additional detail until we can get this addressed so then that they could move forward. And they are planting, you know, 800 to 1,000 trees, 4.5 acres of woodland, and it's either 2.5 or 2.8 of the grass.
Thank you. As it stands, we have a first and a second motion to approve the applicant's request for variance. Could I get a roll call vote? Huh. Oh, I thought we had a motion. I was trying to go home, sorry. Could I get a motion? Or is there a motion? Are we doing these separately or two? Yes. Could I have, is there a motion for the first variance request or not?
Mr. Chair, I mean, it is one recommendation for both, so I would advise not breaking it apart. I mean, normally we would separate them out, but in this case, it's one recommendation for both with the condition that I mentioned.
I think that's procedurally appropriate, yes, to consider both together.
If I don't have any objections from the board, I would accept a motion for both variance requests in one motion.
I make a motion for both variance requests in one motion.
I'll second that. And do we have to vote? Or do we even need it?
I would like to, if possible, vote on a motion that included the condition. I make a motion to grant the following variance. A variance from the Natural Features Protection Ordinance, Chapter 50, Section 50-6.2H, to authorize the development proposed to encroach into a protected slope, which has a grade greater than 20% and protected slope setback, and also a variance from the Natural Features Protection Ordinance, Chapter 50, Section 50-6.2G, to authorize a 17.5% increase in the removal area of woodlands on the site to allow 67.5% clearing of woodlands, where 50% is the maximum permitted, conditioned upon the applicant planting 4.5 approximate acres of replacement woodland and 2.5 approximate acres of natural grasses.
Is there a second?
Excuse me for just 1 minute. So you're working off of the agenda page, and the public hearing notice has specificity as far as the...
As the 2.5? Okay,
Well, no. It has specificity as far as the impact on the slopes. So there's a sentence, like, so when it was read into the record...
Could you read that sentence?
It was, this will impact approximately 4.5 acres of man-made and natural slopes, and it will also impact 3.5 acres of man-made and natural slope-protected setback area.
I make my motion with the addition of the sentence that Pete just read.
Okay, and then one other point of clarification, Beth technically made a motion, and do we need to rescind, or do we?
I rescind.
I think she can withdraw the motion and we can proceed.
Okay.
I'll accept the withdrawal. Thank you. So we have a first, we have a motion to accept the variance as read and then amended with a sentence by Administrator Eldridge, or addition. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
We'll start with Mr. Lauger,
Yes.
Mr. Carroll,
Yes.
Doan,
Yes.
Harrington,
Can I go last? Can I go last?
well, normally, yeah, we normally just, we keep it in roll call vote.
What are my options beside yes or no?
Abstain,
Abstain.
Do that?
Vanden Hamburg,
Yes.
Turpinning.
Yes.
The motion has passed. Your application request has.
I thought we could only abstain if we had a conflict of interest.
Oh, good job, guys.
It's not over. It's not over yet. I misplaced my agenda, Administrator Eldridge. I believe we have reports or any other communication, and then we need to discuss our recommendation for a new board member.
Yeah, yes, the only item left on the agenda is to discuss the ZBA interviews that were held on May 25th.
Thank you. On May 25th, both Jeremy and Beth and I met with two qualified candidates to be added as alternate members to this board. Ultimately, we felt that both were qualified, but that one, Jared Burdew,
Yes.
would be qualified and a good fit for the board. And he is who we are recommending be taken to the commission for approval for addition to this board
As an alternate, right?
as an alternate. And Administrator Eldridge, we are still in the process of identifying additional candidates.
That is correct.
Thank you.
We do have one other alternate position available.
Okay.
And all the action tonight, a simple voice vote is acceptable to move that recommendation forward.
All those in favor of accepting the recommendation of Jared Burdew to be recommended to the City Commission for placement on this board, please signify by saying aye.
If that's a motion, I second.
I have a second, so all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes.
Okay, you got that? So Carol made the motion. Yeah, because he was on the interview team, so. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I hear you. You are correct.
I officially adjourn the meeting at 9:57 p.m.
And Mr. Burdew is in the audience.
Oh, is he?
Our new Zoning Board of Appeals member.
Sorry, I didn't see you.